I received an email from Dili this morning.
Dear Carmela Baranowska, greetings from an independent and democratic East Timor. May we take this opportunity to introduce ourselves at the East Timorese Archival Centre. Since the end of Indonesia's illegal occupation of our homeland, we have begun collecting historical photographs, songs and films about East Timor. We understand that you have been involved in a long-term documentation project about our country. Can you send us more information, please? Yours sincerely.
I spent a long time looking through all the old footage I had collected, the music I once listened to, and the diaries that I'd kept. And then there was the unbearable sadness I had felt during the long years that Indonesia had occupied East Timor, and my country, Australia, had sided with the invaders. It was this sadness which had motivated my collection. So I decided to compile fragments of a film for the East Timorese Archival Centre. While I worked, I typed up a quote from a short story I had once read, and I ended up pinning it above my desk. My visual diary begins in 1997, I wrote back to East Timor. In those terrible days, Australia was the only country in the world to recognise Indonesia's illegal occupation of East Timor. The future was in our dreams, the shared past was in our collective memory, and as for the present, that was inescapable. Here we are in a miserable church hall in the outer suburbs. Henrique was an East Timorese asylum seeker. With the others here, he had been waiting over 2 years to find out if he could stay in Australia. Our government argued that these asylum seekers were both Indonesian and Portuguese. Would they be deported to Portugal or worse, Indonesia? Nobody really knew. I would get to know Henrique later, but at the time I recorded the thoughts of Etavina, who was working with this distraught community.
People are afraid that they will be sent back to Timor, because if they are being sent back to East Timor, it really means death.
So people don't seem to understand. They say, oh, we just go to another country, go to Germany. Because in the past, a lot of refugees in Portugal went to Germany and all that to work. But that's only for temporarily, for a very short time. That's okay. But to actually go and settle living there is a very different case. People tend to think that it's very easy. Oh, just go there and settle there.
So there are a lot of fears about this, and people are still afraid also that what can the government do to them? Because of their experience in Timor, they still have this fear that if they speak out against the government, they can be put in jail, or that they're afraid that immigration department will also come and arrest them in the middle of the night and they just disappear. People still have this sort of fear.
Every Tuesday morning, Etavina taught English class to the asylum seekers. I looked back to my own school textbook with its bland pronouncement about Indonesia's invasion of East Timor. Of course, there had been no mention of the massacres, the tortures and the rapes. And now that East Timor is independent, it is the Australian government that has to go back to school. Our government is trying to fashion its own version of history, but they have yet to make a formal apology to the East Timorese. For this would be an acknowledgement of our complicity in their oppression. In 1997, I began to interview Cliff Morris. He was among the first Australians to understand our country's betrayal of East Timor.
No, I don't think they ever envisaged the Australian soldiers leaving, and they certainly had no idea what was going to happen when we did leave.
He had served there in 1942, fighting the Japanese. In 1973, his squadron returned to thank the East Timorese. During his stay, Cliff found out how in 1942 the Japanese had retaliated against the East Timorese who had helped the Australians.
Well, when I went back to East Timor, I went back with my son, Peter, who was 21 at the time, and we borrowed some horses, and we were going to do the return trip to the beach from the northern coast. But after we'd got about halfway, nobody had bothered to get any horses for us, so we had to stop. And it was while we were on the first part of our horse journey that I discovered that what had happened to the people after we left, how the Japanese had come in and massacred the people. They went from house to house looking for evidence of Australian occupation, and that would consist of Australian clothing, which we'd given to the people, Australian coins, which we'd given to them for payment of goods, or, strangely enough, Australian BO. Now, if any of those things were discovered in any house, the Japanese killed everybody in the house, men, women, children, babies.
What was your reaction when you heard about this?
Horror. They put out the hand of friendship, we accepted it, and all they got was death. And when I came back to Australia, I decided that I would do whatever I was capable of doing for the people of East Timor. And I started to produce an English Teton dictionary, which took me 10 years to complete, and was eventually published by the ANU. And while I was doing that work, I also collected village stories in Teton and translated them into English and produced another little booklet. But how can you repay people for your life? I lived in Australia for 30 years thinking that my friends in Timor were all safe, and they weren't, they were dead. And they gave their life for me. Now I can't repay that life. So I just feel that I'm totally indebted to the people of East Timor, and always will to my dying day.
There was no talk of compensation?
No. None at all.
The happier the people seem, I ended up writing in my letter to the archival centre, the more deteriorated the film has become. even begin to tell me what happened to these people after the invasion. During these long-lost years of occupation, I remember Cliff sitting in my living room, telling me how he had undergone basic training at Wilson's Promontory. Henrique's uncle had helped Australian soldiers like Cliff during World War II. We ended up retracing Cliff's steps, going back to the place where the Australian soldiers had trained before they went to East Timor in 1942.
Montes, vales e fontes, regatos e ribeiros, pedras dos caminhos e ervas do chão. Calai, pássaros do ar e ondas do mar, ventos que sopram nas praias que sobram de terras de ninguém. Calai-vos e calemo-nos, é tempo de silêncio, no silêncio do tempo, ao tempo de vida dos que perderam a vida pela nossa pátria, pelo nosso povo, pela nossa
tama saida fatin be ke siraha la hela parodi be reno soldado niane to agora ser la estraga siraha sira sei tau na fatin hela fatin Malaysia sia tang fatim hansa abrigo e sintina e a haris fatin sirane e a campamento ne siraha lo ne sia toma completo hela Nanza sira rai peranza recorda sa un che sira nieva batreno in bajo di bahal funo ni niane. Tanzania è stato Australia bel halu hantiana. Ni amigo ni che aiuta ni foni vida foni an odi salva nia.
What do you see as the role of history when it comes to East Timor?
What a shocking question to ask. A poor old digger. We took from the mouths of the villagers, and they said that it was necessary for them to look after and protect us because we were protecting them.
Australia basic kalang hate ke hetang ahi lorong quando lorong sa lokrai tuk tolu tuk hate ke hetang Amerika fo hate ke hetang Australia ne seriansi ne makita ni vizinho ita obrigado tau matang hare ajuda sira.
By this stage, over 10,000 Australians had joined the Sanctuary Network. We worked together to stop the deportation of Henrique and 1,400 other East Timorese asylum seekers. We remembered how during World War II, Australians like Cliff had been protected by East Timorese like Henrique's uncle. I asked Cliff if he was prepared to hide an East Timorese person.
Yes, I am.
You say that unequivocally?
Unequivocally. Because I believe that the Timorese need to be supported more in Australia, and for the government to realise that the sentiments of the population are very strong towards the Timorese. And as for me personally, well, my span of life is nearly finished, and I'll do whatever I can.
Would you like to add anything else?
No.
In 1997, when I began my collection, we could not predict that political changes in Indonesia would herald independence for East Timor. The future seemed as remote as finding life on another planet.
Soy
Soldado já